Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Near Memo with Mike and Greg today, and we've got a juicy array of things to talk about. We're going to be talking about GBP and LSA consolidation on a number of fronts. We're also going to be talking about Google kind of cleaning up its map, changing colors and changing pins, arguably in an effort to sort of showcase more advertising and promotion. And then, of course, we're going to be talking about the Yelp antitrust suit against Google that was just filed in the federal court in Northern California, which includes some state causes of action as well. So that is very interesting, coming on the heels of the liability finding in the DC Circuit Court, as everybody knows here listening to this. So we're excited to get going. So Mike, why don't you jump in?
Sure. So last night or the night before, Ben Fisher tweeted that reviews in LSA were now going to be consolidated with the gathering of reviews was going to now use the Google Business Profile link. So this is something that we saw happen in the UK in May, and Google is now, as we hypothesized then, Google is rolling that out to the US and probably globally, where they're consolidating LSA reviews, getting rid of LSA reviews and consolidating around GBP reviews, where there are at least some form of moderation and ability to dispute things.
Let me jump in for a second. So that, I mean, I don't want to preempt the rest of your explanation, but that will address the problem of people hijacking the reviews of public parks and national parks and landmarks as a way to sort of boost their review counts and ratings, right? That should address that in one stroke.
It will address that, and it will address the abuse of the URL that's been LSA URL that's been used for both fake review tax and for buying fake reviews and LSAs to some extent, and it'll bring it under the auspices of a somewhat more sophisticated algorithm, all the while getting rid of the original idea that hasn't been around for a while, but the original idea of verified users and verified reviews, which is what everybody really wants. The other thing that happened was they announced the consolidation of booking between LSA and the GBP using the GBP booking tools. So LSAs will no longer have their own booking tools, so you'll book through GBP. And then, I don't know, a month ago or so, they made an announcement that that LSAs had to have an associated GBP in Europe, and in the case of lawyers here, and it appears that feature is going to be rolling out more broadly, where LSA is going to be increasingly dependent on the Google Business Profiles for things like reviews, integrations, and data, as well as potentially trust. So, I mean, we're seeing sort of the decline of LSA as its standalone domain within Google. So one assumes that the ad sales are being, pushed into more aggressively into Google Ads, and the product is being pushed more aggressively into GBP. I think it's a reflection of Google cutting back staff in local this year and last year significantly to, they say it's to do more with AI. I think it may have to do as much with their battles on the antitrust front. It's going to be very expensive for them and require a lot of splitting, and perhaps they might even be potentially, I mean, this is very speculative, they could be preparing for a breakup, who knows, by doing these things.
I'm sure they're doing scenario planning, but I don't think they're expecting a breakup.
I don't think they're expecting a breakup, but I do see consolidation going on between LSA and GBP, which, I mean, if GBP were to have its own ad product, it could be LSA, for example. Well, anyway, so we're seeing this consolidation of technologies and techniques and moderation
and staffing, probably
primarily staffing into GBP. So I think LSAs are going to stay around. They're very successful, but I think they're going to rely ever more on GBP data and GBP moderation.
Well, in a certain sense, this is logical, and you would expect you one might have expected them to do this as a in the first place, right? To sort of
Right.
pool resources and tie these two programs together, as opposed to having a distinct one, the LS under the LSA sort of banner or umbrella, which ultimately permitted the abuses that you've written extensively about with hijacking of reviews and other things. Um, but but your theory is that this is not they're not trying to make the programs more coherent. This is really about operational costs and
Expense, yes.
yeah,
That would be my assessment of it. I mean,
yeah,
that they have cut back on all these various, you know, the unlimited expenses around experiments that are successful, and they're trying to, you know, roll it back. So I just find it fascinating, given the cuts that we've seen in GBP, the cuts in service, the cuts in product, the inability to get things like suspensions dealt with, the inability to get reviews found, all of these bugs that are taking longer and longer to solve. So it's essentially LSAs being added into GBP, but GBP doesn't even have enough staff to do what they're doing. So it'll be interesting to watch.
yeah. Those people probably feel a certain amount of pressure or stress around all of this, I would imagine.
I would guess.
So we're not going to have any kind of review verification at all now for any of these products, GBP or LSA. And originally LSA was supposed to be verified. I mean, the ostensibly or not ostensibly, but the the rationale for creating LSAs on some level was to rise above the review fraud and spam that you see in GBP, even though it's an
And the
ad
listing
product.
fraud. And the
Yeah,
listing fraud.
right.
Yeah,
Listing
both.
and review fraud. I mean, it's an ad product. It's its own product that has certain characteristics, but the fraud problem was one of the considerations in creating LSAs. And by going back or by consolidating GBP and LSA and abandoning any kind of review verification, they're relying entirely on a sort of a tightened algorithm to address review fraud.
And accepting some amount of both listing and review
Acceptable
fraud.
fraud, right?
Acceptable fraud, right? As opposed to the original LSA, which was very, very heavily vetted. Of course, very few people participated in
Right.
it, but it was very heavily vetted, and they quickly turned away
Well,
from that strategy.
right. So I don't know exactly what's happening with it, but some months ago, Curtis Boyd, I participated in this, so this is how I know about it. Created a study on the economic impact of review fraud, and I can't reveal anything about that because it's not been released to my knowledge, but it was very interesting and quite a lot of money, at least hypothetically, is impacted economic. There's quite a significant economic impact from review fraud for in scenarios where people are these sort of high consideration high value scenarios where people are going out and hiring a lawyer who is not competent or hiring a contractor who does the kind of HVAC fraud that you've written about, that there's a real tangible cost there to the consumer, to other businesses that lose out, legitimate businesses that lose out. And it's pretty interesting, and I think there have been some attempts to quantify that in the past, but this was a sort of a more rigorous attempt. So we'll see if that ever
Right,
comes
and
out. Hopefully, it will.
that economic cost speaks to why the FTC is getting more serious about it. I
But
believe
this goes to sort of the notion that a certain level of fraud. I mean, regardless of how diligent Google was, they probably could not totally eliminate fraud, but um, it goes to this sort of acceptable or tolerable level of fraud. I mean, the plastic surgeons who have defrauded their customers, how tolerable is it when somebody goes in for surgery and that's botched, or they get they change their appearance and it's not exactly what they were hoping for or something.
I
You
wonder
can't.
if
There's no redo there.
no, there is no redo. I wonder if Google ever took down um, the Allure plastic surgeon in Seattle fake reviews that this guy had bought.
You can check right now in real time.
I can check this out in real time. I can use Google Local to see whether Allure Aesthetics or whatever it's called, I don't even know how to spell it, still has all the
ALLURE.
fake reviews. They still do have all the fake reviews.
So
this
how
guy
many
was,
months later? How many months later is
yeah,
this?
it is.
Year?
Yeah, it's quite. I mean, the lawsuit came out almost 2 years ago, and it was resolved uh, this spring. So yeah, so fake reviews have been at Google forever.
So that's the analogy in my mind is like the pothole problem in sort of pothole liability in municipalities, right? Or some kind of public nuisance, kind of public safety hazard liability. So my understanding vaguely, I think I've said this before on this podcast. My understanding vaguely is that if you're in a municipality and there's some, tree falls over or a big giant sinkhole in the street or something, if you encounter it and get injured as a result of your impacting the hazard, uh, you know, if it just happened, rainstorm, tree falls over, you run into it and get hurt, city isn't liable because they didn't know about it, couldn't have done anything about it. But if there's a hazard that has been neglected for an extended period of time, and the municipality was aware of it, bike cyclist goes over a giant pothole, sinkhole, is paralyzed, then the city is on the hook for not having addressed the problem. And this is kind of that situation in a way. Somebody sees the good review for a lure, goes and has the nose job or whatever it is, and I mean, it's a question of like standard of care, and is whatever. That's maybe not a great example, but it's like if Google is on notice and neglects to do something like take down reviews after this guy's been fined and convicted on some level, that should create some accountability or some liability.
This is America.
Yeah. Don't you mean America?
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.